It was 3:10 a.m. when the phone rang. Emma stirred awake, her heart pounding as if it already knew something was wrong. The room was pitch black except for the faint red glow of her alarm clock. She blinked at the digits, trying to shake off the grogginess that clung to her mind like cobwebs. Who could possibly be calling at this hour? Her hand fumbled across the nightstand until she found the phone. Without thinking, because no rational person would answer a call at this time, she pressed the green button and brought the device to her ear. "Hello?" Her voice cracked under the weight of exhaustion and unease. There was silence on the other end, but not an empty one. It felt alive, like someone or something was breathing softly into the receiver. Emma's pulse quickened. "Who is this?" she demanded, sharper now. And then, just as she was about to hang up, a voice spoke. Low, raspy, and unmistakably familiar. "Help me." Emma froze, her fingers tightening around the phone so hard they turned white. That voice it couldn't be, but there was no mistaking it. It belonged to Daniel, her husband who had died 6 months ago in a car accident. She'd identified his body herself. I watched them lower him into the ground. Held his picture every night since then, crying over memories too painful to let go of. But here he was, speaking to her from beyond the grave, or maybe from some twisted nightmare she couldn't wake up from. "Daniel?" she whispered, her throat dry. "Is that you?" No response. Just more silence, heavy and suffocating. Then the line went dead. Emma sat upright in bed, clutching the phone against her chest as though it might protect her from whatever just happened. Her breathing came in short gasps, and her skin prickled with goosebumps despite the warmth of the blankets. Had she imagined it? Was this grief playing tricks on her again? She'd read somewhere that people sometimes hallucinate after losing loved ones. Maybe her subconscious had conjured Daniel's voice out of desperation. She glanced at the clock. Again, 3:30 a.m. 5 minutes had passed, though it felt like hours. Slowly, she opened her messages app to check the call log. Surely, there would be proof, a missed call or voicemail, but the screen showed nothing. No incoming calls. No record of anything unusual happening tonight. "This isn't real," she muttered aloud, trying to convince herself. "You're fine, go back to sleep." But sleep didn't come easily after that. Every creak of the house seemed louder than usual, every shadow darker. By the time dawn broke through the curtains, Emma felt like she hadn't rested at all. Instead, her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. What had she heard last night? And why did it feel so vividly real? By mid-morning, Emma decided to distract herself with chores. Cleaning always helped clear her head, even if only temporarily. As she vacuumed the living room, her thoughts drifted back to Daniel. They'd been married for 5 years before his death, and those years had been filled with joy, laughter, and love. Losing him had shattered her world, leaving behind a void she wasn't sure she'd ever fill. Still, life went on. Friends told her she needed to move forward, to find happiness again. But how could she when every corner of their shared home reminded her of him? His favorite mug still sat on the kitchen counter. His sweatshirt hung on the hook by the door. Even the scent of his cologne lingered faintly in the air, taunting her with memories she both cherished and dreaded. As she straightened the cushions on the couch, her gaze fell on the framed photo of them together. Taken during their honeymoon in Italy, it captured a moment of pure bliss, Daniel grinning widely, his arm draped casually around her shoulders. For a split second, she could almost hear his laugh echoing through the room. Shaking her head, she placed the frame face down on the coffee table. Seeing his smile hurt too much these days. That evening, Emma met her best friend Claire for dinner in a cozy cafe downtown. Over steaming bowls of pasta, she debated whether to mention the strange phone call from the previous night. Part of her wanted to confide in someone, to share the burden weighing heavily on her chest. But another part worried Claire would think she was losing her mind. "So how are you holding up?" Claire asked gently, stirring cream into her tea. Really holding up, I mean. Emma shrugged, picking at her food. I don't know. Some days are better than others. Nights are the hardest. Claire nodded sympathetically. Have you thought about seeing a therapist? Sometimes talking to someone neutral can help. I'm not crazy, Claire, Emma snapped, sharper than intended. Catching the hurt look on her friend's face, she sighed. Sorry, I didn't mean to bite your head off. I guess I'm just tired. No worries, Claire said quickly. I get it. Grief does weird things to people. Just promise me you'll take care of yourself, okay? Emma forced a smile. I will. They chatted idly for a while longer, avoiding heavier topics. When the bill arrived, Claire insisted on paying, citing some unspoken rule about supporting friends in need. Outside the cafe, they hugged goodbye, and Emma promised to text later in the week. Walking home alone, Emma couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She glanced over her shoulder several times but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Still, her pace quickened until she reached the safety of her front porch. Fumbling with her keys, she unlocked the door and stepped inside, locking it securely. Behind her, that night, Emma tried to stay awake as long as possible. She curled up on the couch with a book, determined not to fall asleep before midnight. If the phone rang again, she wanted to be ready to confront whoever or whatever was behind it, but fatigue eventually won. Somewhere around 2:30 a.m., her eyelids grew too heavy to keep open, and she dozed off at exactly 3:10 a.m. The phone rang once more. This time, Emma jolted awake instantly, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She grabbed the phone and answered without hesitation. Daniel? She whispered hoarsely. Again, that same low, raspy voice replied. Help me. Where are you? She blurted, clutching the phone tighter. What happened to you? For a moment, there was silence. Then the voice spoke again, slower this time, each word dripping with urgency. Basement. The line went dead. Emma stared at the phone, her hands trembling violently. Basement? Their house didn't have a basement. At least not one she knew of. This old Victorian-style home had been in Daniel's family for generations, but he'd never mentioned anything about a hidden space beneath the foundation. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Goosebumps erupted along her arms, and her breath fogged in front of her face. A cold breeze swept past her, though all the windows were closed. Something wasn't right. Not remotely. Summoning what little courage she had left, Emma stood and made her way to the hallway closet where Daniel used to store tools and boxes. She rummaged through the clutter until she found an old flashlight. Its beam flickered weakly but provided enough light to guide her steps. Following instinct, or perhaps the faint pull of curiosity, she moved toward the far wall of the dining room. There, tucked away behind a dusty tapestry, she discovered what looked like a trapdoor embedded in the floor. Her stomach churned as she knelt beside it, running her fingers over the rusted metal handle. With a deep breath, she pulled the door open. A set of rickety wooden stairs descended into darkness. Below, Emma hesitated, her heart hammering wildly. Every fiber of her being screamed to turn back, to pretend she'd never seen this door. But Daniel's voice echoed in her mind, pleading for help. Taking one last steadying breath, she began descending the stairs, the flashlight casting eerie shadows on the damp stone walls. At the bottom, she found herself in a narrow corridor, lined with shelves stacked high with old books, jars, and strange artifacts. The air smelled musty, like decay and forgotten secrets. In the center of the room stood a small table, its surface covered in yellowed papers and photographs. One photo caught her eye immediately. It was of Daniel, but not the Daniel she knew. This version of him looked younger, angrier, standing beside a woman Emma didn't recognize. Scrawled across the bottom of the image in faded ink were the words, "Never forget what we did." Before she could process what she was seeing, The flashlight flickered and died, plunging her into total darkness. Panic surged through her as she spun around, searching blindly for the staircase. But instead of finding her way out, she heard footsteps, approaching from somewhere deep within the basement. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Emma's blood ran cold. Someone or something was coming for her. And then, just as suddenly as the sound began, it stopped. From the shadows a voice whispered, barely audible yet chillingly clear, "You shouldn't have come down here." Emma's breath hitched as the disembodied voice echoed through the darkness. Her body froze, every muscle tensed like a coiled spring. The air around her grew heavier, colder, pressing against her skin like an invisible weight. She clutched the useless flashlight in one hand, its dead bulb mocking her helplessness. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling but louder. Then she intended, "Show yourself." No response came, not immediately anyway. The silence stretched unnaturally long, broken only by the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. Then, soft laughter began to rise from the shadows, low and mirthless, sending shivers crawling up her spine. It wasn't Daniel's laugh. It was colder, crueler, almost mechanical. And then, just as abruptly as it started, the laughter stopped. A match flared to life a few feet away, illuminating the face of a figure standing at the edge of the basement. It wasn't human, or at least not entirely. The flickering light revealed sunken eyes, hollow cheeks, and pale lips curled into a sinister grin. But what made Emma's blood run cold was the familiarity in those features. They resembled Daniel's face but twisted, corrupted, as though something evil had taken root inside him. "You shouldn't have come down here," the figure repeated, his voice raspy yet eerily calm. He stepped closer, holding the lit match between his fingers like a macabre offering. "This isn't your place anymore." "My place?" Emma stammered, backing away until her back hit the cold stone wall. "What do you mean? Who are you?" Instead of answering, the figure raised the match higher, casting more light across the room. For the first time, Emma noticed symbols carved into the walls, ancient runes etched deep into the stone, glowing faintly red under the dim illumination. Beneath them lay objects that looked disturbingly ritualistic, candles arranged in pentagrams, jars filled with murky liquid, and photographs pinned haphazardly to the shelves. Each photo depicted someone different, a man, a woman, a child, but all shared one thing in common. Their faces bore expressions of pure terror. "What is this? What have you done?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. The figure tilted his head, studying her like a predator sizing up its prey. "I didn't do anything, not alone at least." His gaze shifted to the table behind her, where the photograph of Daniel and the unknown woman still lay. "He did most of it, with her." Emma turned sharply toward the photo, her mind struggling to piece together the fragmented puzzle before her. That woman, she'd seen her before, somewhere, but where? "Think carefully," the figure urged, his tone laced with mockery. "You know her better than you think." A memory surfaced suddenly, sharp and painful. It was from months ago, shortly after Daniel's death. While sorting through his belongings, she'd found an old journal tucked away in the attic. At the time, she hadn't given it much thought, just another relic from his past. But now, snippets of its contents flooded back to her. Cryptic entries about rituals, sacrifices, and someone named Layla. That was the woman in the photo. Emma spun back to face the figure, her fear giving way to anger. What did they do? What was this thing they were involved in? "They open doors best left closed," he replied cryptically. "Doors that can't be shut again. And now..." He paused, leaning closer until his face was inches from hers. "Now you're part of it too." Before she could react, the match went out, plunging the room back into darkness. Emma screamed, blindly stumbling toward the staircase. Her foot caught on something, a loose board or perhaps a stray object, and she fell hard onto the damp floor. Pain shot through her knee, but adrenaline kept her moving. She crawled forward, hands scraping against rough stone, until she finally reached the base of the stairs. But when she tried to climb them, she realized they weren't there anymore. The staircase had vanished. Panic surged through her veins as she scrambled upward, only to find empty space where solid steps should have been. Desperate, she pounded her fists against the trapdoor above, shouting for help even though she knew no one could hear her. Tears streamed down her face as reality crashed over her like a tidal wave. She was trapped, alone, in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Time lost meaning in the suffocating blackness. Minutes felt like hours, hours like days. Eventually, exhaustion forced her to sit down, her back pressed against the wall once more. As she hugged her knees to her chest, trying to steady her breathing, she noticed something strange. Faint whispers drifted through the air, so quiet they might have been imagined. But they weren't random sounds, they formed words. Names. Daniel. Lila. Emma. Her own name sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through her. Someone or something was calling her. And it wasn't coming from outside the basement. It was coming from within, summoning what little courage she had left. Emma stood and followed the sound. The whispers grew louder as she moved deeper into the labyrinthine corridors, guiding her toward a door hidden behind a tattered curtain. Unlike the rest of the basement, this door appeared new polished wood, shiny brass handle, and an ornate engraving of a serpent coiled around a dagger. Heart racing, Emma hesitated before reaching for the handle. Whatever lay beyond this threshold, she knew it would change everything. Taking a shaky breath, she pushed the door open. Inside, she found herself in a small chamber lit by dozens of candles. Their flames danced wildly, casting flickering shadows on the walls. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, atop which rested a leather-bound book. Its cover bore the same serpent and dagger emblem as the door. As Emma approached, the whispers grew deafening, overlapping voices speaking in languages she didn't understand. She reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing the book's surface. Instantly, visions exploded in her mind, flashes of Daniel and Lila performing dark rituals, chanting incantations, summoning forces neither fully understood nor controlled. She saw their faces contorted with fear and regret as the entity they'd unleashed consumed them, piece by piece. Then amidst the chaos, she saw herself, standing exactly where she was now, clutching the cursed book as the entity whispered promises of power, revenge, and answers to questions she hadn't dared ask. "Don't touch it," a voice warned sharply behind her. Emma whirled around to see Claire standing in the doorway, her expression grim. Relief washed over Emma at the sight of her friend, but it quickly faded when she noticed the knife clutched tightly in Claire's hand. "Claire, what are you doing here?" Emma asked, her voice shaking. "I came to stop you," Claire said, stepping closer. "You don't know what you're messing with. But how did you find me?" Emma stammered, glancing between Claire and the book. Something about this situation felt wrong. Off. "I've always known about this place," Claire admitted, her tone colder now. "About Daniel, about Lila, about what they did." Emma's stomach churned. "What are you talking about? You never mentioned any of this before." "That's because I was protecting you," Claire snapped, her patience snapping like a brittle twig. "But now you've gone too far. You've awoken something we can't fight, not without paying a price." "A price?" Emma echoed, dread pooling in her gut. "What kind of price?" Claire hesitated, her grip tightening on the knife. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Your soul." Emma stared at Claire, her mind struggling to process the words that had just left her friend's lips. "Your soul." The phrase hung in the air like a death sentence, heavy and suffocating. Her chest tightened as she took a step back, putting more distance between herself and the knife glinting ominously in Claire's hand. What are you talking about? Emma demanded, her voice trembling but laced with defiance. You're supposed to be my friend. How could you even say something like that? Claire didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stepped further into the candlelit chamber, her shadow stretching unnaturally across the walls. Her usually warm brown eyes were cold now, calculating, as if she were sizing up an opponent rather than comforting a friend. I didn't want it to come to this, Claire said finally, her tone softening, but only slightly. But Daniel made his choices, and now you've walked right into the consequences. You can't undo what's been done. Emma shook her head, trying to make sense of the surreal situation. No, this doesn't make any sense. If you knew about all of this, about Daniel, about Lila, about whatever this is, why didn't you tell me sooner? Why wait until now? Because I hoped you'd stay away. Claire snapped, her composure cracking for the first time. She gestured sharply toward the cursed book on the pedestal. Do you think I wanted to see you get dragged into their mess? I tried to protect you, Emma. I really did. But now you've opened doors I spent years trying to seal shut. Protect? Me from what? Emma shot back, her voice rising. From the truth? From knowing who my husband really was? Because clearly, you know a hell of a lot more than you're letting on. Claire hesitated, her jaw tightening. For a moment, it seemed like she might relent, but then her expression hardened again. Fine, she said bitterly. If you want answers, I'll give them to you. But don't say I didn't warn you. She lowered the knife slightly, though not enough to seem harmless, and began pacing around the chamber. The candles flickered erratically, responding to some unseen force, or perhaps Claire's mounting tension. Daniel wasn't just dabbling in occult nonsense. Claire explained, her voice low and clipped. He and Lila were part of a group, a secret society obsessed with unlocking forbidden knowledge. They believed they could control powers beyond human understanding, powers tied to entities, things that shouldn't exist in our world. Emma swallowed hard, her throat dry. And these entities, what happened when they summoned one? They lost control, Claire replied grimly. The ritual went wrong. Whatever they called upon turned on them, and it consumed them. That's why Daniel died. Not in a car accident, like everyone thinks. He sacrificed himself to contain the entity before it could spread. Or so we thought. Emma's knees nearly buckled beneath her as the weight of Claire's words sank in. All this time, she'd mourned Daniel as a victim of fate, never suspecting the truth behind his death. And now, hearing it laid bare like this, she felt both betrayed and furious with him, with Claire, with herself for being so blind. But why does it matter now? Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why am I involved? Claire stopped pacing and fixed her gaze on Emma, her expression unreadable. Because you're connected to him. To Daniel, and because you touched the book, you've awakened it again. The book, Emma repeated numbly, glancing at the cursed object still resting on the pedestal. Its leather cover seemed darker now, almost pulsing with malevolent energy. What exactly is it? It's a key, Claire said simply. A gateway. Once activated, it calls the entity. And trust me, it won't stop until it finds a way out. Emma's heart raced as realization dawned. That's why the stairs disappeared. Why I'm trapped down here. It's testing me. Claire nodded grimly. Exactly. And if you fail. She trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air. Emma clenched her fists, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. So what do I do? How do I stop it? You can't, Claire admitted bluntly. Not without paying the price. Emma stared at her, incredulous. You keep saying that, the price. What does that even mean? Claire hesitated, her grip on the knife tightening again. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. It means giving yourself to it, becoming its vessel. Your soul in exchange for sealing it away for good. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the faint crackling of the candle flames. Emma's mind reeled, torn between disbelief and despair. She couldn't accept this, not after everything she'd already endured. There had to be another way. There has to be another option, she insisted, her voice shaking with desperation. There has to be something else we can do. Claire shook her head sadly. I wish there were, but this is how it works. Someone always pays the price, always. Emma took a shaky step forward, her resolve strengthening despite the overwhelming odds. Then let it take me, she said firmly, surprising even herself with the conviction in her voice. If it means ending this once and for all, then fine. Take me instead. Claire's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, she looked genuinely conflicted. Then, without warning, she lunged forward, grabbing Emma by the wrist and yanking her toward the pedestal. No! Claire shouted, her voice cracking. You don't understand. You can't just throw your life away like this. There's still too much you don't know. Emma struggled against her grip, panic surging through her veins. Let go of me. What are you doing? Before she could react, Claire shoved her violently onto the floor. The impact knocked the wind out of Emma, leaving her gasping for breath. As she struggled to sit up, she saw Claire raise the knife high above her head, her face twisted with anguish. I'm sorry, Claire whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I never wanted it to end like this. With a swift motion, Claire brought the blade down, but the strike never landed. Instead, a deafening roar erupted from somewhere deep within the basement, shaking the very foundations of the house. The candles extinguished simultaneously, plunging the room into total darkness. Emma scrambled backward instinctively, her hands scraping against the rough stone floor. Somewhere in the chaos, she heard Claire scream, a raw, primal sound filled with terror. Get away from her, a new voice commanded, cutting through the noise like a blade. Emma froze, her heart hammering wildly. That voice, it was familiar. Too familiar, Daniel? She breathed, blinking into the darkness. A faint light appeared, illuminating the figure standing in the doorway. It was him. Or at least, it looked like him. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes glowing faintly with an otherworldly hue. He held a strange artifact in one hand, a jagged shard of obsidian etched with runes, and he radiated an aura of both power and pain. Stay back, Daniel warned, his gaze locked on Claire. This isn't your fight anymore. Claire stumbled backward, clutching the knife tightly. You're dead, she spat, her voice trembling. You have no right to interfere. And yet here I am, Daniel replied calmly, though his tone carried an edge of menace. Step aside, Claire. Let me handle this. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Finally, Claire lowered the knife, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Without another word, she turned and fled into the shadows, disappearing into the labyrinthine corridors. Once she was gone, Daniel approached Emma, kneeling beside her. His presence was both comforting and unsettling, like a ghost haunting her memories. Are you okay? He asked softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Emma stared at him, tears streaming down her cheeks. How are you here? What's happening? Daniel sighed heavily, his expression pained. There's no time to explain everything. Just know this. I made a deal to protect you. And now it's time for you to decide whether you want a break. It or finish what I started. Emma's stomach churned as the implications sank in. Whatever choice lay ahead, it wouldn't come without sacrifice. Emma stared at Daniel, or what appeared to be Daniel, her mind struggling to reconcile the man before her with the husband she'd buried 6 months ago. His touch was cold, almost icy, yet it carried a strange familiarity that sent shivers down her spine. She wanted to believe this was real, that he had somehow returned to save her, but every instinct screamed caution. What deal are you talking about?" Emma asked, her voice trembling as she pulled away slightly. "And why does everything keep coming back to me? Why am I involved in all of this?" Daniel hesitated, his glowing eyes flickering like dying embers. For a moment, he looked almost guilty. Then he straightened, his expression hardening as if steeling himself for what he was about to say. "When Lila and I performed the ritual," he began slowly, choosing each word carefully, "we weren't just trying to summon an entity. We were attempting to bind it to control its power. But we underestimated it. It consumed us both, body and soul. Before I died, I made a bargain with it. My life in exchange for yours." Emma's breath caught in her throat. You gave yourself up for me?" He nodded grimly. "I thought it would end there. That by sacrificing myself, I could protect you from ever being dragged into this nightmare. But I was wrong. The entity isn't bound by rules or logic. It feeds on connection, on love. And because of our bond, it found a way to reach you anyway." Emma shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "So what happens now? What choice do I have to make?" Daniel knelt beside her again, his gaze piercing and unwavering. "You can walk away. Leave this place and try to live your life as best you can. But the entity won't stop hunting you, not until it claims what it wants. Or," he paused, swallowing hard, "you can take my place, seal the entity away permanently. But doing so means giving yourself completely. Your soul, your existence." Emma's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing like a drumroll leading to doom. The weight of his words crushed her, leaving her paralyzed with indecision. Could she really sacrifice herself to save others? To escape the endless torment of running from something she couldn't fight? Before she could respond, a low rumble reverberated through the chamber, shaking the walls and extinguishing the faint light Daniel had conjured. Darkness enveloped them once more, thick and suffocating. From somewhere deep within the labyrinth, a guttural growl rose, growing louder with each passing second. "It's here," Daniel whispered urgently, grabbing her hand. "We don't have much time." Emma clung to him, panic overtaking reason. "What do we do?" "We fight," he said firmly, pulling her to her feet. "Follow me." Hand in hand, they ran through the shadowy corridors, guided only by Daniel's faint luminescence. Behind them, the growls grew closer, accompanied by the sound of claws scraping against stone. Whatever pursued them was relentless and hungry. As they reached the central chamber, where the cursed book still rested on its pedestal, Daniel shoved Emma behind him, shielding her with his body. The entity emerged from the shadows, towering over them like a living nightmare. Its form shifted constantly, morphing between human-like shapes and grotesque monstrosities. Eyes burned like molten gold across its ever-changing surface, and tendrils of black smoke writhed around it like serpents. "You cannot hide from me," the entity rasped, its voice layered with countless others. "Your soul is mine." Daniel stepped forward, raising the obsidian shard high above his head. "Not today," he snarled, his voice filled with defiance. With a sudden burst of energy, he hurled the shard directly at the entity. It struck true, embedding itself in the creature's shifting mass. A deafening shriek filled the air as the entity recoiled, writhing in agony. Light erupted from the shard, illuminating the entire chamber and temporarily driving the darkness back. But the victory was short-lived. The entity's wounds began to heal almost instantly, and its rage intensified. With a swipe of one massive claw, it sent Daniel flying across the room, slamming him into the wall with bone-crushing force. He slumped to the ground, unmoving. "No!" Emma screamed, rushing to his side. She cradled his head in her lap, tears streaming down her face. "Daniel, please wake up." His eyes fluttered open weakly, and he managed a faint smile. "Don't waste time mourning me," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Finish it. Use the book. Emma hesitated, glancing at the cursed object still sitting untouched on the pedestal. She knew what Daniel meant, what sealing the entity would require. Her soul, her life, everything. I can't, she whispered, shaking her head. I'm not strong enough. Yes, you are, Daniel insisted, his grip tightening on her hand despite his fading strength. You've always been stronger than you think, stronger than me. Before she could argue further, the entity let out another ear-splitting roar, lunging toward them with terrifying speed. Acting purely on instinct, Emma grabbed the book and flipped it open. The pages glowed with eerie symbols, pulsating in sync with the entity's movements. Read it, Daniel shouted, his voice strained. Now! Emma scanned the text frantically, her lips moving silently as she tried to decipher the ancient language. Each word felt heavier than the last, as though the act of speaking them bound her irrevocably to their meaning. Finally, she found the incantation, a single phrase repeated 3 times. Ex anima me, ex tenebris tua. She spoke the words aloud, her voice trembling but resolute. The entity froze mid-lunge, its golden eyes widening in shock. The chamber trembled violently as the light from the obsidian shard intensified, spreading outward in waves. The entity howled in fury, thrashing wildly as the light consumed it. Emma continued chanting, her voice growing stronger with each repetition. Tears streamed down her face as she felt the pull, the tug of her very essence being drawn into the void. This was it. This was the price. As the final syllable left her lips, the world seemed to implode. A blinding flash of white light engulfed the chamber, erasing everything including herself from existence. When Emma opened her eyes again, she found herself standing in her living room. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting the walls with warm hues. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Confused, she glanced around, searching for any sign of what had happened. Then she noticed the photograph on the coffee table, the same one she'd seen in the basement. Only this time, the image was different. Instead of Daniel and Lila, it showed her own face alongside the same sinister woman. Beneath the photo, scrawled in faded ink, were the words, "Welcome home." Emma stared at the photograph on the coffee table, her mind reeling as the words beneath it, "Welcome home," burned into her consciousness. The sunlight streaming through the windows felt wrong somehow, too bright, too cheerful for the storm raging inside her. Her hands trembled as she picked up the frame, inspecting it closer. It wasn't just her face in the picture, it was her expression, cold, calculating, unrecognizable. What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. A soft chuckle echoed from behind her, sending a chill down her spine. Emma spun around to see Lila standing in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame with an unsettling smirk on her face. She looked exactly as she had in the other photos, dark hair cascading over her shoulders, sharp features softened only by the faint curve of her lips. But there was something different about her now, something predatory. Surprised? "Lila," asked, stepping into the room. "You shouldn't be. After all, you knew this was coming." Emma backed away instinctively, clutching the photo tightly. "I don't understand. What's happening? Where's Daniel?" Lila tilted her head, studying Emma like a scientist observing a lab rat. "Oh, poor Daniel. He played his part beautifully, didn't he? Sacrificing himself to save you, guiding you through the ritual. But did you really think it would end with him?" Emma's stomach churned as realization dawned. "No," she breathed, shaking her head. You're the one who started this. You and Daniel, you brought the entity here." Lila clapped mockingly, her smile widening. "Bravo. Took you long enough to piece it together. Yes, Daniel and I summoned it, together, and yes, we lost control. But unlike him, I didn't let fear dictate my choices. I embraced it." "Embraced what?" Emma demanded, her voice rising. "What are you talking about?" "The power," Lila replied simply, spreading her arms wide as if presenting a grand revelation. The entity isn't just some mindless monster, it's ancient, infinite, and it thrives on connection, on binding itself to human souls. That's why it chose you. Why does it always have that? Emma staggered backward, her knees hitting the edge of the couch. She collapsed onto it, her mind struggling to process the enormity of what Lila was saying. Choose me? No. No, that's not possible. I sealed it away. I read the incantation. I sacrificed myself. Lila laughed again, the sound cold and hollow. Did you really think it would let you go so easily? Oh, Emma, you didn't seal it away. You became its vessel. The words hit Emma like a freight train, knocking the air out of her lungs. She glanced down at her trembling hands, half expecting them to shimmer or glow with unnatural energy. But they looked normal. Too normal. No, she muttered, shaking her head furiously. That's not true. I stopped it. I ended it. You stopped nothing, Lila countered sharply, her patience wearing thin. You completed the cycle. The entity needed a new anchor, a fresh soul to tether itself to, and you walked right into its trap. All those rituals, all those sacrifices, they were leading to this moment. To you. Emma's vision blurred as tears welled up in her eyes. Everything she'd done, the pain, the loss, the desperation, it had all been for nothing. Worse than nothing. She had unknowingly handed herself over to the very thing she'd tried to destroy. So what happens now? She asked hoarsely, her voice cracking under the weight of despair. Am I possessed? Trapped forever? Lila shrugged nonchalantly, walking toward the window and gazing outside. That depends on you. The entity doesn't care about your suffering. It feeds on your strength, your willpower. If you fight it, it'll consume you bit by bit until there's nothing left. But if you accept it, she turned back to Emma, her expression unreadable. You might find a way to coexist. Coexist? Emma repeated incredulously. With a monster? With power, Layla corrected, her tone almost reverent. Think about it, Emma. You've spent months grieving, feeling powerless, trapped in a world you couldn't control. Now you have the chance to change that, to become more than you ever dreamed possible. Emma stared at her, searching for any sign of deception. But Lila's words rang eerily true. In the depths of her grief, she had yearned for control, for a way to rewrite the past. Could this thing inside her offer that? Or was it just another lie? And what about you? Emma asked finally, her voice steadier now. Why are you telling me all this? What do you get out of it? Lila smirked, her gaze flickering with something dark and calculating. Let's just say I have my own plans. And having someone like you on my side could prove useful. Emma clenched her fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. She wouldn't let Lila manipulate her, not again. Not ever. Whatever the entity was, whatever it wanted, she refused to be its pawn. I won't let you use me, Emma said firmly, standing up despite the fear coursing through her veins. If this thing is inside me, then it's mine to control, not yours. Not anyone else's. Lila raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. We'll see how long that lasts. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Emma alone with her thoughts and the growing awareness of the presence lurking within her. Over the next few days, Emma struggled to come to terms with her new reality. Every movement, every thought felt heavier, as though the entity was constantly watching, waiting. At first, she resisted it, fighting against its influence with every ounce of strength she had. But slowly, she began to notice changes, subtle shifts in her perception, her abilities. Things she once feared no longer seemed insurmountable. Problems that had once paralyzed her now felt solvable. One night, unable to sleep, she stood in front of the mirror and stared at her reflection. For the briefest moment, she saw it, a flicker of gold in her eyes, a shadow moving across her skin. Then it was gone, leaving only her familiar face staring back. "You're still here," she whispered, addressing the presence directly. "But you don't own me." For the first time since the ritual, she felt a spark of defiance ignite within her. Maybe Lila was right. Maybe the entity thrived on fear and resistance. But Emma wasn't afraid anymore. She understood now that survival wasn't about running or hiding. It was about adaptation, transformation. Weeks turned into months, and Emma found herself changing in ways she never imagined. She quit her job, sold the house, and started over somewhere new. The memories of Daniel still lingered, but they no longer consumed her. Instead, she carried them with her as a reminder of where she'd been and how far she'd come. One evening, as she sat on the porch of her new home, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, she reflected on everything she'd endured. The pain, the betrayal, the sacrifice, it hadn't been meaningless. Each step had led her here, to this moment of clarity. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find who you really are. And sometimes, embracing the darkness within can lead to a light you never knew existed. The end.